There are places on Earth that don't appear on any map you're allowed to see. Not because they're hard to reach, but because what's waiting there makes the question of visiting irrelevant. One is so isolated that orbiting astronauts are its nearest neighbors. One hides 24,000 years worth of danger beneath a dome of concrete. And one is home to people who have defended the same boundary since before written language existed. But today, we begin with an island that didn't exist until 1967, and that a single footstep could destroy forever. Number 10. Surtsey Island, Iceland. On November 14, 1963, a volcanic eruption beneath the ocean south of Iceland broke the surface and kept going. For nearly 4 years, it built upward, layer by layer, until a new island stood above the water. Scientists named it Surtsey, after the Norse fire giant, and immediately understood what they were looking at. A completely sterile piece of land, a place where life would have to begin from nothing. From that moment, Surtsey became one of the most protected places on Earth. Not because it will kill you, but because its entire scientific value depends on human absence. The question researchers are trying to answer here is fundamental. How does life establish itself on bare rock, with no soil, no seeds, and no existing ecosystem to draw from? Every organism that arrives does so naturally, carried by wind, ocean current, or the digestive systems of seabirds passing overhead. Researchers have documented every arrival meticulously. The first vascular plant was recorded in 1965. By 2013, 69 plant species had been found. Seabirds began nesting, and their droppings accelerated soil formation. The progression is being observed in real time across decades in a way that is impossible to replicate anywhere else on Earth. The Icelandic government declared Surtsey a protected nature reserve while the volcano was still erupting. Access is limited to a tiny number of approved scientists who must sterilize all equipment and clothing before landing. The Icelandic Coast Guard patrols the surrounding waters. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The contamination protocols are extraordinarily strict. In one documented incident, a researcher who used the outdoor toilet on the island inadvertently introduced a tomato plant through the resulting deposit. The plant was immediately removed, and the incident was treated as a serious breach of protocol, requiring investigation. Surtsey will not kill you, but visiting it without permission would be one of the most destructive acts of scientific vandalism on the planet, erasing decades of irreplaceable data with a single footstep. The island is a living experiment that belongs to the future, not to us. And if Surtsey is sealed to protect something fragile, our next location is sealed because the terrain itself has never cared whether humans survive it. Number 9. The Darien Gap, Panama and Colombia. The Pan-American Highway stretches nearly 30,000 kilometers from Alaska to the southern tip of Argentina. It crosses deserts, mountain ranges, and rainforests. Engineers have bridged rivers and carved roads through terrain that seemed impassable for generations. And then it stops! For 100 kilometers, the highway simply ends. On one side, Panama. On the other, Colombia. In between, the Darien Gap. A stretch of jungle so dense, so hostile, and so fundamentally resistant to human movement that it has defeated every serious attempt to complete the road for over a century. The rainforest canopy is so thick it creates near-permanent darkness on the forest floor below. The ground is a shifting morass of mud bogs and swamp that can swallow vehicles entirely. Rivers flood without warning, transforming navigable routes into dangerous torrents within hours. The fer-de-lance pit viper, one of the most dangerous snakes in the Americas, responsible for more human fatalities in the region than any other species, is common throughout. Mosquitoes carrying malaria, dengue fever, and other tropical diseases are present at every altitude and in every season. The history of the Darien Gap is a history of failure and suffering. A Scottish colonial attempt in the 1690s ended in catastrophe. Of the 2,500 settlers who arrived full of ambition, fewer than 1,000 survived to return home. The colony was abandoned within 2 years. Modern engineering expeditions in the 1970s, equipped with machinery and resources the Scottish settlers could not have imagined, made little meaningful progress before being abandoned. Today, the gap is crossed primarily by migrants making desperate journeys between continents. Humanitarian organizations estimate death rates of between 1 and 3% among those who attempt the crossing. In a journey that can take up to 10 days on foot through active conflict zones where armed criminal groups and paramilitary organizations operate with near complete impunity. Bodies are routinely found in the jungle. Many are never found at all. The road has never been completed. Efforts to do so are now actively opposed on environmental grounds. The gap sits within a biodiversity hotspot and the territory of indigenous peoples, including the Guna and Embera-Wunan communities. The jungle that has defeated every engineering project has, in a strange way, become worth protecting. Number 8. Gangkhar Puensum, Bhutan. Most of the world's great mountains have been climbed, some multiple times, some by solo climbers without supplemental oxygen, some in the depths of winter when conditions are at their most extreme. Gangkhar Puensum has never been climbed at all. At 7,570 meters, it is the highest unclimbed mountain on Earth. It stands in Bhutan, and its name translates as White Peak of the Three Spiritual Brothers. For the Bhutanese, high peaks are not targets to be conquered. They are sacred homes of spirits, and the act of climbing them is a profound act of disrespect toward the forces believed to inhabit them. But before Bhutan closed the mountain entirely, 4 separate expeditions were granted permission to attempt the summit between 1985 and 1986. All 4 failed. They were driven back by sudden, violent storms, temperatures plunging to -50 degrees Celsius, and ice walls that offered no viable route toward the summit, regardless of the skill or determination of the teams attempting them. The mountain did not yield. No one has ever stood on the true summit or anything close to it. In 1994, the Bhutanese government banned all mountaineering above 6,000 meters. In 2003, mountaineering was forbidden entirely across the country. The decision was made out of respect for the spiritual beliefs of the Bhutanese people, not because the mountain had comprehensively beaten every expedition sent against it. Though the mountain had certainly done that too. Gangkhar Puensum sits there now, visible from valleys below, photographed by satellites, mapped in extraordinary detail from the air, and completely untouched at its summit. A peak that the modern world has located with precision and cannot reach at all. It may be the last mountain of its scale on Earth to remain that way permanently. Number 7. North Sentinel Island, Bay of Bengal. There is a small island in the Bay of Bengal, roughly the size of Manhattan, covered in dense forest and surrounded by shallow reef. It has no military installations, no radiation, no venomous wildlife, no volcanic activity. What makes North Sentinel Island one of the most unreachable places on this list is its people. The Sentinelese have lived on this island for an estimated 50,000 years. They are one of the last truly uncontacted peoples on Earth. We do not know their language. We do not know the structure of their society, their beliefs, or the details of their history beyond what can be inferred from observation at a distance. Anthropologists have spent decades studying them from boats and helicopters without getting close enough to establish any meaningful communication. What we know with certainty is that every attempt at contact has been met with immediate, coordinated lethal force. Arrows, spears, warriors positioned on the beach in organized defensive formations. The response has been consistent and unwavering across centuries of documented encounters. In 1974, a film crew approached the island to document the tribe. The director took an arrow to the thigh before the boat was forced to retreat. In 2006, 2 fishermen whose boat drifted too close during the night were killed. Their bodies were visible from Indian Coast Guard helicopters but could not be recovered. Every attempt to get close enough was driven back by sustained arrow fire from the shore. In 2018, an American missionary named John Allen Chow paid local fishermen to ferry him to the island illegally. He had been planning the trip for years and was convinced he could make peaceful contact. He approached the island multiple times over several days. On his final approach, he was killed. His body was never recovered. Indian authorities who attempted to retrieve it were driven back with arrows. The Indian government enforces a 5 nautical mile exclusion zone around the island. The law exists not primarily to protect outsiders from the Sentinelese, but to protect the Sentinelese from outsiders. A population living in isolation for tens of thousands of years has no immunity to common diseases. A single contact with an infected visitor could trigger an epidemic capable of wiping out the entire tribe within weeks. North Sentinel Island is unreachable, not because of what it contains. It is unreachable because of a decision, maintained by its people across thousands of years, and enforced with lethal consistency every single time someone has tested it. Number 6. The Kuril Islands, Russia. From a human barrier, we travel to one built from steel, radar, and the full weight of military law. Stretching in a long volcanic arc between Japan and Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula, the Kuril Islands are a fog-shrouded chain of over 50 islands that have been at the center of a territorial dispute between Russia and Japan since the final days of World War II. The Soviet Union seized the entire chain in August 1945. Russia and Japan have never signed a formal peace treaty as a result. The islands remain Russian territory. And Russia has made very clear, through decades of military investment, exactly who is and is not welcome there. The central section of the chain is designated a restricted military zone. Active bases, radar installations, and anti-ship missile batteries, including the advanced S-300 system, are positioned throughout the islands. Unauthorized vessels detected in these waters risk immediate armed interception, arrest, and interrogation under suspicion of espionage. Russian military aircraft conduct regular patrol flights over the chain. In recent years, Russia has dramatically expanded its military presence across the Kurils, deploying additional missile systems, increasing the size of garrisons, and upgrading base infrastructure as part of a broader strategic posture in the Pacific. The message to any unauthorized visitor is delivered not through signs or fences, but through the visible presence of weapon systems designed to sink ships and destroy aircraft. Some of the outer islands can be visited through heavily regulated tours that require advance approval from Russian authorities. The core military zones cannot be accessed under any civilian circumstances. They are a fortress in the North Pacific, built not to manage tourism, but to project the kind of military power that makes the question of visiting irrelevant. Number 5. Yakutia Interior, Russia. If the Kuril Islands are sealed by human design, our next location is sealed by something far older and far less negotiable. Deep in the heart of Siberia lies the Sakha Republic, known as Yakutia. It is one of the largest administrative regions on Earth, covering over 3 million square kilometers, bigger than Argentina, and one of the least inhabited places on the planet. The reason is simple and absolute. The environment here is among the most hostile to human survival anywhere on Earth's surface. In winter, temperatures in the deep interior regularly plunge to -60 or -70 degrees Celsius. At those temperatures, exposed skin freezes within seconds of exposure. Steel becomes brittle and shatters under impact. Rubber cracks and fails. Vehicle engines seize if left stationary for more than a few minutes. The infrastructure that keeps human beings alive in normal cold environments fails systematically, without warning, in the deep Yakutian winter. But the deeper danger comes during the brief summer thaw. As the surface layer of permafrost melts, a layer that in some areas is hundreds of meters deep, the landscape transforms into an impassable morass of shifting bogs and thermokarst lakes. These bodies of water can appear overnight, forming where solid ground existed the day before, swallowing vehicles, equipment, and anyone caught on unstable terrain without warning. Navigation becomes impossible. What appeared on satellite imagery as traversable ground becomes open water within days. The deep interior has no permanent roads, no permanent infrastructure of any kind. The only routes that exist during winter are ice roads built over frozen rivers, temporary paths that appear for a few months each year and disappear completely when the thaw begins. During the summer months, the interior is essentially cut off entirely. Beneath all of this lies something extraordinary. The permafrost acts as a natural freezer preserving biological material for tens of thousands of years. Woolly mammoths, cave lions, woolly rhinoceroses, and other Ice Age animals have been recovered from the permafrost with fur intact, soft tissue preserved, and in several documented cases, liquid blood still present inside the body after more than 30,000 years. The deep interior of Yakutia is one of the most significant paleontological environments on Earth, sitting inside one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Number 4. Tsingy de Bemaraha, Madagascar. From a landscape that freezes everything it touches, we travel to one that cuts. On the western coast of Madagascar lies a national park whose name is a direct translation of its own warning. Tsingy de Bemaraha means where one cannot walk barefoot. That description understates the reality by a significant margin. The park is a 930-square-mile labyrinth of razor-sharp limestone spires rising from the ground, some reaching over 70 meters in height. They were formed over millions of years as groundwater eroded the limestone bedrock from below, carving out a network of deep caverns and leaving behind an interlocking structure of blades, needles, and narrow channels between them. The edges of the rock are genuinely sharp enough to cut through leather boots with sustained contact. The gaps between spires drop into caverns of unknown depth below. A fall in this terrain would be unsurvivable and essentially unrecoverable. The terrain has protected the ecosystem within it so effectively that species found nowhere else on Earth have evolved in complete isolation within the park. The sifaka lemur navigates the spires with what looks like ease. It evolved specifically in this environment and can leap between rock faces that a human being cannot stand on at all. Over 1,100 plant and animal species have been recorded in the region, approximately 100 of which were unknown to science at the time of their discovery. Even reaching the park presents its own serious challenges. It sits on a remote stretch of Madagascar's west coast, accessible only via a single dirt road that becomes completely impassable for 6 months of the year during the rainy season. The river routes that provide an alternative are heavily populated with Nile crocodiles, among the most dangerous animals on the African continent. The vast majority of Tsingy de Bemaraha has never been explored on foot, not because no one has tried, but because the terrain makes sustained exploration physically impossible without equipment and techniques that themselves become dangerous in an environment this unforgiving. Number 3. Point Nemo, South Pacific. We have crossed jungles, frozen tundra, and razor-sharp stone. Now we reach a location where the barrier is none of those things. The barrier here is pure distance. Point Nemo is the oceanic pole of inaccessibility, the single point on the surface of the Earth that is farthest from any land in every direction. It sits in the South Pacific Ocean, approximately 2,688 kilometers from the nearest coastlines. To reach it from any direction requires crossing more unbroken open ocean than most ships travel in a single voyage under normal operational circumstances. When the International Space Station passes overhead at its orbital altitude of approximately 400 kilometers, the astronauts aboard are closer to Point Nemo than any human being on land or at sea. The surrounding ocean sits within the South Pacific Gyre, a massive, slow-rotating system of ocean currents that blocks nutrient-rich water from entering the region from any direction. The result is one of the most biologically barren stretches of ocean on the planet. Marine life here is extraordinarily sparse. There are no commercially viable fishing grounds, no established shipping lanes, and no reason whatsoever for any vessel to pass through under normal circumstances. The nearest regular human activity in any direction is hundreds of kilometers away. Space agencies from multiple countries have turned this emptiness into a practical resource. Point Nemo has become the designated spacecraft cemetery, the safest location on the planet to deorbit satellites, space stations, and other hardware at the end of their operational lives. The objects fall through the atmosphere and impact the ocean here, where the risk of hitting inhabited land or active shipping lanes is effectively zero. Over 300 pieces of space hardware have been directed to the ocean floor at this location since the 1970s, including the Russian Mir space station, multiple cargo resupply vehicles from various space programs, and numerous decommissioned satellites. No law prohibits visiting Point Nemo. There is nothing to protect and nothing to damage. The planet's own geometry simply makes it one of the most logistically demanding destinations on Earth to reach, for no practical purpose whatsoever. Number 2. Kerguelen Islands, Indian Ocean. From the emptiest point on Earth, we travel to one of the most violently isolated land masses on the planet. Deep in the southern Indian Ocean, roughly equidistant between the southern tips of Africa, Australia, and the continent of Antarctica, lies an archipelago that its 18th century French discoverer named the Desolation Islands upon first sight. That was not romantic exaggeration. It was an accurate description of what he found. The Kerguelen Islands are a French subantarctic territory, a jagged, glacier-carved landscape of sheer cliffs, frozen plateaus, and deeply indented coastlines. The main island alone covers over 6,600 square kilometers, with a coastline so irregular it stretches for nearly 2,800 kilometers. The interior is dominated by the Cook Ice Cap, a permanent glacier covering hundreds of square kilometers that feeds dozens of smaller glaciers flowing toward the coast. The islands sit directly in the path of the Furious 50s, the band of latitudes in the southern hemisphere where westerly winds circle the globe continuously with no land mass of any significance to interrupt or weaken them. Sustained winds exceeding 150 kilometers per hour are routine. Gusts above 200 kilometers per hour have been recorded. The seas generated by these winds are among the roughest on the planet, with waves regularly exceeding 10 meters in height. The combination of extreme wind, extreme cold, and extreme sea state makes the waters around the Kerguelen Islands among the most dangerous maritime environments on Earth. France maintains a permanent research station, Port-au-Français, staffed by a rotating team of scientists and support personnel, numbering between 50 and 100 depending on the season. The only way to reach it is via a dedicated supply and personnel vessel that makes the journey from Réunion Island 4 times per year. There are no flights, no commercial shipping, no tourist infrastructure of any kind. Between those quarterly visits, the station and everyone on it is completely cut off from the rest of the world. Over 80% of the archipelago's interior has never been explored on foot. The combination of extreme weather, glacier-carved terrain with hidden crevasses, and the complete absence of any rescue capability beyond the station's own very limited resources makes the interior effectively unreachable for any practical purpose. Even the scientists stationed at Port-au-Français operate under strict protocols, limiting how far from the base they can travel and under what conditions. The Kerguelen Islands are not sealed by law, they are sealed by the reality of what reaching them requires. And what happens to anyone who underestimates that requirement in an environment that offers no second chances? Number 1. Vale do Javari, Brazil. Every place on this list has presented a single dominant barrier: terrain, cold, distance, law, human force. Our final destination combines all of them and adds one more that none of the others have. Deep in the western Amazon, in a region of Brazil that borders Peru and Colombia, lies the Vale de Javari Indigenous Territory. It covers 85,000 square kilometers of dense, largely unmapped rainforest, an area larger than Austria. It contains no roads, no airstrips, no permanent infrastructure of any kind that exists for the benefit of anyone other than the people who already live there. The rivers that thread through the territory are the only routes of access, and they wind through hundreds of kilometers of forest before reaching anything resembling a boundary. The canopy above them is so dense that satellite imagery struggles to penetrate it. The jungle floor beneath is a world of its own, dark, wet, and navigated effectively only by people who have spent their entire lives learning it. And the Vale du Javari is home to the highest concentration of uncontacted peoples anywhere on Earth. At least 16 distinct groups live within the territory in complete voluntary isolation. Possibly more. The density of the forest and the deliberate avoidance behaviors of these communities make accurate counting essentially impossible. What FUNAI's monitoring operations have established is that these groups are present, that they are mobile across large areas of the territory, and that they are aware of the outside world's existence. They have made a decision about it. They want no part of it. Their defense of that decision is effective and ongoing. Illegal loggers and miners who have entered the territory have been met with coordinated, silent resistance. Some have not returned. The groups within the Javari Valley are not passive. They are not isolated through ignorance of what lies beyond their territory. They are isolated through choice, a choice maintained actively and enforced with the full knowledge of what they are keeping out. Brazilian federal law makes unauthorized entry into the territory a criminal offense. FUNAI enforces the boundary with armed patrol operations by boat and air. The no-contact policy was established after centuries of evidence that contact between isolated peoples and the outside world produces one consistent outcome for the isolated people: catastrophe. The biological reason is absolute and non-negotiable. Groups living in complete isolation for generations have no acquired immunity to the diseases that circulate constantly and harmlessly through connected human populations. A single infected outsider entering the territory, carrying nothing more than a common respiratory virus, could trigger an epidemic capable of killing half a community's population within weeks. This is not a theoretical risk. It has happened repeatedly every time isolated Amazonian peoples have been contacted throughout the history of the region. Some communities lost 90% of their population within years of first contact. The Vale du Javari is unreachable by law, by terrain, by the active and deliberate resistance of its inhabitants, and by the biological reality of what contact would mean. It is the one place on this list where the barrier is not just physical or legal, it is moral. Some places are unreachable because nature made them that way. Some because governments decided to make them that way. The Vale du Javari is unreachable because it has to be. And because the people inside it have decided it will remain so. From an island that must never be touched to preserve science, to a valley that must never be entered to preserve lives, these 10 places represent everything that still lies genuinely beyond human reach. Not because we lack the technology, not because we haven't tried, but because some barriers, terrain, cold, distance, law, and the choices of people who were here long before us, are more powerful than our desire to cross them. The world has been mapped, but mapped does not mean reachable. And for these 10 places, the gap between the two may never close. If you want to keep exploring the parts of Earth that remain genuinely off-limits, make sure you are subscribed. And tell us in the comments, which of these places do you think is the most impossible to reach and why?